Hello, and welcome to Trusting After Trauma, Season 2 Rebuilding Resiliency After Narcissistic Abuse. I'm your host, Pi Venus Winslow. This informative interview series will provide valuable insights from experts who are dedicated to helping others heal from childhood trauma and narcissistic abuse so they can lead joyful, powerful, and fulfilling lives. Many of these professionals specialize in medicine, science, psychology, abuse recovery, personal development, energy work, and much more. I'm thrilled to have Susan Stiffelman here with us today. Susan Stiffelman is a licensed marriage, family, and child therapist and the author of Parenting Without Power Struggles and Parenting with Presence. Susan offers online programs on topics including raising tweens and teens, parenting in the digital age, homework, raising siblings, and co-parenting with a narcissist. For many years, Susan was HuffPost's weekly advice columnist and is currently host of the popular Parenting Without Power Struggles podcast. Her work has been featured in the Today Show, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. Welcome, Susan. It is such a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much for
Thank
joining us.
you. Thanks for having me, Pi. This is such an important topic. I'm glad you're doing the summit.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Susan, many parents who have experienced their own childhood trauma worry and feel guilty because they realize that they've reacted to their children in patterns that their parents did. So, how can they begin to address what's already happened and what could they do to move forward differently?
Those are two fundamentally important questions. So let's talk about the first one. We will lose our way, whether we have gone through trauma and abuse or we're simply human and stressed, overwhelmed, anxious, feeling pulled in 1,000 directions. Parents will, from time to time, not show up as the version of themselves they would prefer to be. Now, of course, when the layer of past trauma and abuse is on top of the normal challenges and stressors of parenting, it can magnify everything, including our reactivity. So the beauty is that we don't need to be perfect. We need to learn and become comfortable with repair. And when we approach our child after we've lost our way, lost our cool, said or done something that we believe might be a symptom of us perpetuating a cycle of what we experienced ourselves, there's a chance for us to interrupt that pattern so it doesn't cascade down through another generation. And that simply means we show up later with our child when we feel we're back, we've restored some sense of stability, and we say, I lost my way there for a few minutes, or this morning, or for 2 days last week, and I want to know how you are. I want to tell you that I'm sorry, and listen to how that was for you and see what I can do to make you feel more comfortable, to make things right. Now, what you'll notice is missing from that is I lost my cool this morning. I was screaming and shouting and even threatening to send you to go live with your grandparents. But it was only because, doesn't even matter what you say now. It was only because you were rude. It was only because I had asked you 6 times. It was only because you had been teasing your brother. It's only because you were pulling the cat of the tail of the cat. It doesn't matter, because the power of this lies in us not justifying what we've done.
Mm-hmm.
Most likely, if we experience trauma and abuse as a child, that is how our parent or grandparent, whoever was our primary caregiver, justified their reactivity, their scary or harmful or abusive behavior. It's only because.
Mm-hmm.
So when we make repair, it leaves out any kind of rationalization, justification, explanation, and says, I'm so sorry for how loud and scary I was this morning. It must have been really hard for you to stand in on the other end of that. How can I make things better. I'm working on it. I'm looking at it. It's painful for me, and I'm sure it's very painful and scary for you, but tell me how that was. And mostly, I want to know how I can help you feel okay again, because I can do my work, and I am, sweetheart. I am looking at the parts of me, because we talk in parts language, the parts of me that sometimes seem to get flooded with such big feelings that I forget who I want to be in that moment.
Mhm.
But I'm here to try and make things better between us. So let's just leave it at that before we move on to say how to avoid it, because that's really a whole new topic.
Mhm.
This concept of repair does so many things. First of all, it reassures the child that you're attempting at least to be a safe place for them. It models for them a humility and vulnerability that they will then take forward into their own adult lives without leaving them thinking they have to be perfect either.
Mhm.
This is the part that allows us all to be human, is to say, I sometimes lose my way. And so it shows them that they can, you know, acknowledge and take ownership of those moments when they aren't who they'd like to be. And it also um, tells them that you're getting help, that you're working on it, whether it means you're getting help through therapy, through group, through reading books, through taking summits like these classes, like I have a membership program that I'm reaching out for ways to move me past that usual old patterned way of reacting. How can I help make this better for you? What do you want me to know? And I'm sorry.
Mhm.
But we
Yeah.
don't put the child on the spot. We don't make the child responsible for us feeling better. If you'd only forgive me, I wouldn't be so hard on myself. I just feel like the worst mother in the world. Please tell me I'm not. We're not doing that kind of icky stuff, because it's not the child's job to make us feel better. We're really showing up as the adult and saying, I lost my way. I might have scared you, disappointed you, worried you. How can I? Here's what I'm doing to work on it. What do you need? Tell me about what that was like for you and what you need to feel better.
Mhm. I love that. That's such a perfect example of being responsible
Yeah.
for our behavior and opening a dialogue instead of shutting the conversation down.
Yeah.
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 So, how can parents stay present and emotionally available while they're working through their own trauma?
Well, not easily. And one thing I've noticed, and I've been doing this work for over 40 years, is that nothing will regurgitate the stuff that we may have long ago buried inside ourselves, like raising a child, because it all comes back up again. And that can be very painful, because when we were a child on the receiving end of a parent's abuse, for instance, or narcissistic behavior, we may have absolutely resolved, I'm never going to do that to my kids when I have children. I'm never going to do to my children what was done to me. I'm going to do it differently. And then lo and behold, our backs against the wall, and the words of our mother or father are coming out of our mouth, and we're just horrified, like, oh my God, I've been, taken over. I'm possessed.
Mhm.
And so it starts by a willingness to be compassionately aware of that phenomena and know how normal it is. So it's very, very normal that something can lie dormant for a long time, and then you have a child, and it comes up again. So that's normal. And then we notice it. We stay very present in our body. Wow, there's so many old feelings that are getting stirred up. My own child is ignoring me or putting their own needs in front of mine, just like my mother used to do. She used to ignore me and put her needs in front of mine. And
Mhm.
now my 5-year-old's doing the same thing, or my 3-year-old, or my 6-month-old,
Mhm.
because children are very egocentric. They really don't care about our needs and feelings. They're
Mhm.
not supposed to, but it can reactivate a lot of that core deep wound for us as we start to navigate the road of parenthood. So we start by being very benevolent and kind toward ourselves. Wow, these feelings are familiar and very painful. I feel,
Mhm.
and noticing where in your body you're feeling them, bringing into the mix a sense of a loving, caring, accepting, comforting parent. Maybe no resemblance to the parent you actually had, but you
Mhm.
can conjure one up in your imagination and imagine what they might say to you in that moment when you feel your blood starting to boil. You're going to just lose it. You're going to repeat what was done to you or said to you or how someone approached you in a very unkind way. And you just imagine being held or stroked by a loving and accepting parent of your imagination who says, "This is really hard. This is as hard as you think it is.
Mhm.
Sit with me a moment here. Let's take 3 breaths. Where do you feel this upset and agitation? Oh, here in your belly. Yeah, yeah." And it's reminding you, what is that reminding you? Oh, there's so much sadness when your mom just didn't care about what you were feeling, didn't show an interest, was just ignoring you. Oh gosh, those feelings are so awful, so painful.
Mhm.
Let's just breathe through those for a moment. Maybe put your hand on that belly and you're stroking your belly saying, "Oh gosh, oh, that was so sad, so painful." So there's a willingness to be very present with it, and in that moment the child is, it's not at all about the child. You've sort of interrupted what might have happened with the child, and if you do that one time out of 50, you're making progress. So I'm not saying this will happen every time you get upset with your child or frustrated or flooded by difficult emotions, but if you do it even once in a while, you're making progress.
Mhm. Yeah. Oh, I love that. How can parents get out of power struggles with their children?
Well, I wrote a book called Parenting Without Power Struggle, so it's a book's worth.
It's a whole
And of
book.
course, I left a lot out. So, the biggest thing that I teach parents is that there are 3 ways we can envision how we interact with our children. And I use my hands to illustrate. So the right hand represents the parent, the left, the child. The
Mhm.
parent is the captain of the ship. So the parent hand is above the child's, not because they're better, more worthy of respect or care, any of that, just because they're the grown up in the room. So it's not about being in control. It's you as the parent, as the captain being in charge, which
Mhm.
is deeply comforting to a child. When we have secure attachment, when we create secure attachment, it's in this model.
Mhm.
So the child says, "I want to watch that scary movie." And you say, "Sweetheart, that's not a good movie for you to watch. Why not? All my friends are watching it." "Well, because you'll have nightmares." "No, I won't." "Well, honey, you had nightmares when you watched that other scary movie, and this one's even scarier. You just treat me like a baby all the time." So you'll notice here's the captain of the ship.
Mhm.
Here's what I call the 2 lawyers. And nobody's in charge, and you're arguing and explaining and justifying. And then it can get worse where the child says, "I hate you. You're the worst, meanest, most controlling mother in the world." And you say, "How dare you speak to me that way? Go to your room right now. No supper for you," or "You get to do extra chores," or "We're canceling that sleepover." Because down here, you feel overpowered. You feel out of control. So, in an attempt to assume some feeling of control, you try and use threats and bribes and punishments and things like that. I call this the dictator. The
Mhm.
dictator has no authentic power. They rule by fear and intimidation or, promising things to people. So we can be the captain, we can be the lawyer, or we can be the dictator. The captain doesn't really engage in power struggles. The captain acknowledges a child's upset or they're longing for the movie or for, peanut butter crackers, at midnight. But that doesn't mean that they feel an obligation to give the child everything they want, nor does it mean that they feel an obligation to justify and explain and lecture the child about why they shouldn't want those crackers or why they shouldn't want to see that movie. There's an ability that the captain has to be present with what the child's experiencing without panicking because the child's unhappy or doesn't like them. So the power struggle is best avoided when you're in captain mode, which is built on a whole array of elements that I teach in my work,
Mhm.
including attachment, including coming alongside our kids rather than coming at them, which engages defiance and so forth.
Mhm. That's beautiful. I love that so much. That's really helpful, and it explains a lot of struggles that I'm
Yeah,
sure that parents
yeah.
experience. And then we've got parents who are co-parenting with self-centered or narcissistic partners. So, what advice do you have to give those parents?
Oh, yeah. Y- I- we have a monthly support group called Co-Parenting with a Narcissist, which I offer with Wendy Bahari, who wrote a book called Disarming the Narcissist, Surviving and Thriving with the Self-Absorbed. And every month we meet with parents who are parenting More commonly after divorce, sometimes they're still married to their partner.
Mhm.
And the stories that we hear, the challenges that they face are so heartbreaking. Very, very difficult path to walk because you were brought into the orbit of the narcissist, often, not always, but often because it replicated a pattern from your own early years. We tend to be attracted to people who are familiar to us, but
Mm.
also because narcissists are clever, successful, smart, charismatic, and can be incredibly seductive and charming when they want something.
Mhm.
So we also have to work with the parents saying, how could I have thought this would be a good person to have children with? Because they're good at what they do, they're very skilled. And that is from their own wound. Like, it's not a judgment of someone who has narcissistic qualities. We're not just the diagnosis, but we act out of our wounds. And so when those two winds meet up and they produce a child or two or three or four, it can be very difficult once you see what's going on, even dimly start to see this pattern that's getting played out with your narcissistic co-parent and that your child, where for sometimes the dynamic is that one child is sort of the golden child. So this is the child who will make the narcissist look good because of their looks, their talents, their achievements, their accomplishments. So that child will generally be favored. And
Mhm.
then you'll have the other, if there's more children, then those might be the ones who are always jumping up and down to see if they can jump high enough to get the narcissistic parents' attention and admiration. And watching this as the non-narcissistic parent is deeply painful because you love your kids and you see, even for the child who's getting all the attention and the golden child, it's a no-win predicament because that child will eventually, hopefully, want to assert their own preferences and will and not just play out the dreams and hopes and needs of the narcissistic parent. And if they deviate from the course that was set for them so they could have the approval of that parent, then going to be a lot of problems.
Mhm.
So when you're married or you're partnered or you're co-parenting with someone, there's so many things that we talk about. One of them is that we give up on thinking that parent will change.
Mhm.
The most liberating thing you can do is to give up on lecturing, begging, explaining, teaching, any of those things that are intended to, you think maybe if I just say it this way, or if I just send them this article, they will see the light. No, that's not going to happen. So you work with what is as opposed to what you wish was, and it creates a lot more freedom and space and a lot less stress. You start to see it as a very practical relationship, and you work from a more formal, more business-like. You don't engage in the emotional stuff going back and forth, and you just keep your children front and center.
Mhm. Yeah, that's so important, and I love that you touched on not trying to change the narcissist because that's just crazy making for sure.
Yeah,
And yeah, for the children, they definitely are affected, and they also face the wrath and abuse that,
yeah.
comes from the narcissistic behaviors, and narcissistic rage. So what are some effective ways for the other parent to empower their children to trust themselves if they've experienced abuse?
We talk a lot in our program about parts. And because, you could be partnered with a narcissistic parent, your co-parent could be narcissistic. It doesn't mean they don't love their children. It doesn't mean they might not be charming and fun to be with for your kids. It might mean that your kids really enjoy their company a lot of the time, or that they're really, wonderful in certain areas. And then, of course, it can all come crashing down when there's a disappointment and the narcissist lets loose with just the horrible things they can do and say, the way they can withhold love, the shame, the humiliating, the abuse. There's a lot of possible outcomes. So we talk with our kids about parts. There's a part of daddy, daddy loves you to pieces. He just loves you so much. And there can be a part of daddy that doesn't listen so well when you're trying to tell him that something upset you, that maybe There's a part of daddy that gets very defensive and has trouble hearing that something he did was upsetting to you. I'm so glad you brought this to my, that you told me what happened when you were at daddy's house. How was that for you? Is there anything you want to ask? Or, so you take the child's lead, but you don't annihilate all the good things about daddy either. You could say, I wonder if it was confusing for you that you and daddy were having, I heard you in the next room having so many laughs and it seemed like you were having fun. And then suddenly he got really mad and I could hear that he was yelling. And I wonder what that was like for you. Is there anything you need to say or that you feel, are you, and then you have to be very careful and respectful not to say, well, I'm going to talk to daddy about that. We have to help our children know that it's safe to come to us. We have this a lot in our Co-Parenting with a Narcissist member program, that the child is really torn between complying with the narcissistic parent's demand that they not tell mom what happened, whatever the situation, and that child's discomfort with keeping a secret, combined with the child's need to untangle something very painful and confusing. So we always advise parents, well, not always, we usually advise parents to try and help a child know that it's always safe to tell them, that you're not going to quickly go behind their back and email daddy about it. There are times when you need to report something, but in general, we really start by prioritizing a child's need to know that they could come to you and that they feel safe doing so and that it's not going to backfire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very important. That's reinforcing them being able to trust.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, Susan, you've shared so much amazingness with us today. I really would love to ask you to leave some gems with our audience. So, in everything that we've talked about today, what would be the three main points that you would want our audience to take away from this interview?
That's great. I think the first would be that when difficult feelings come up in the course of our parenting, that doesn't have to be a bad thing. That can be a positive thing because it can lead us to repairing with our child, modeling what it looks like to do repair, and healing. If we can stay present with what's coming up, then those difficult moments can become transformational. So I think that would be the first. I think the second would be that when we can hold that place as the captain of the ship for our children, of course, easier said than done, as I said, but um, that not only does our child grow up in an atmosphere of more safety. Look, we all move into lawyer and dictator mode. That's just to be expected. But when predominantly we're holding that space for our child, it also heals something in us because we didn't have that kind of stability ourselves if we suffered trauma and abuse. Then in the course of giving that to our child, even though a part of us might be almost envious that our child is getting this kind of parenting that we wish we could have had, we can give it to ourselves also in that moment on some other level where we are reparenting ourselves as that's going on. I would say that the third thing is how important and admirable it is to reach out for support when you need it.
Mm.
I think that that's what breaks the chain. People who are attending this series and taking this in and listening and reflecting on what your speakers are talking about, people in our group, it's hard work. It's much easier to go, no, I'm just going to pretend that never happened. But
Mm-hmm.
the healing and the transformation and the gifts that we give ourselves and to our kids come when we say, help, help. So I am a big fan of people reaching out for support when they need it. And our culture doesn't, it's changing, but we are not historically familiar with what that looks like because there's a stigma attached, whether it's seeking therapy or joining a support group or talking to a friend but just because something's been a stigma doesn't mean it deserves one. So reaching out for support to me is just one of the bravest things somebody can do.
I totally agree. Oh my goodness. Thank you, Susan, so much.
Thank you, Pi, for having me. It's such an important service that you're offering. I'm so glad to be part of it.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for Trusting After Trauma, Season 2, Rebuilding Resiliency After Narcissistic Abuse. We're going to continue to explore with our experts on how we can rebuild resiliency after narcissistic abuse and heal our body, mind, and spirit to live joyful, authentic lives. We'll see you soon.